who's receiving the word from God. And if God told him to build an ark, he is building the ark big enough for whoever wants to go on there could have gone on there. All right, we get that understanding? Even though you don't see all of that, but if it took 120 years for them to build the ark, and they asking him, why were you building the ark? He telling God told me to build it. All right, so if they were destroyed, it was because they would not accept the righteousness that God had put into Noah. And if you see the movies about Noah, then his children didn't halfway believe it either. But that's not what we're going by. We're just going by what the word says. They were saved because of Noah. They were saved because of righteous Noah. And then when we read even in the book of Hebrews about faith, they would mention him in that as well as one of the faith heroes. And so, see, that's a whole different context of when you're saying, why did he destroy other folks? But that's a whole nother scenario. So we're straight on that. Now, was anybody else need to know, because you may not have thought about it from that point of view, but are you understanding that Noah was an opportunity for people to get straight with God, and they didn't? And then we go further down the road and we find out they have another chance and they still don't. Well, since that point was brought up, and that's why I say it's important to know A, B, C, D. You know what order we're in. Because there are some people, if you threw out the name Abraham, Moses, Noah, Joshua, they couldn't put them in order. You know each one separately because each one has a Sunday school story about them. But can you put them in chronological order? And everybody can't do that. And if you can't put them in chronological order, then you can't really put the biblical history is not going to be in chronological order. But if you know how they fit in chronological order, then it's easier for you to understand the Bible narrative. So let me try to bring you up to date with the Bible narrative. Because she asked that question, we want to make sure that you know the chronological order. By the time we get from Adam and Cain and Abel is not the last of the Adam family. Because, and I say it jokingly, but it is true that a lot of people in history who have, started out going to Sunday school, once they read the story of Adam and Eve from the Sunday school story, they didn't read the Bible. They just read the Sunday school story about Cain and Abel. They never did read the Bible. And in their mentality, they grew up as a teenager, and they, keep, every year it's going to be in the Sunday school book about Cain and Abel, and you got Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. So you thought, and by that time you were able to read, and you read Grimm's fairy tales, you read Hansel and Gretel, and you read all of them, and Beowulf, and all of the myths and legends. And so you begin to think that the Bible is just another myth and legend, because it says that Cain killed Abel, and then all these other people, where did all the other people come from if Cain killed Abel and Adam and Eve just had two children, Cain and Abel? And so they, from that point onward, they just believed that the Christian religion and the Bible were, myths and legends. You can see how that could happen, because they did not read the Bible. If they had read the Bible, because the Sunday school story don't go on to say that after Cain and Abel there was Seth, and many sons and daughters. And that's what the King James Version, many sons and daughters, they don't try to name them out. But Adam lived 930 years, and he was fertile 930 years. So they populated the earth. Now, we talk about in modern time, we try to put our modern, I would say, our culture and our society and our morals, and we try to reflect our laws of the modern day on the time of Adam and Eve, and so we talk about incest. Well, they ain't had no such thing as incest. Didn't come until the law came. And the law didn't come to Moses' time when they started talking about incest. Before then, there was no such thing. And after that period of time, incest brought its own consequences. I can imagine that during Adam and Eve time, the consequences of incest were not like they would be now. All right? I'm talking to all adults, right? Close breeding of family will cause a whole lot of mental defects and physical defects. And they would be mentally impaired and physically impaired by close breeding. I can't imagine that was happening during the time of Adam and Eve, when there were many sons and daughters, and we're talking about over 930 years. And I also want to let you know that Cain himself kidnapped some of his brothers, well, he didn't kidnap no brothers, I don't think. He kidnapped some of his kinfolk, the female kinfolk, and he made his own tribe. The Bible not going to tell you all of that, but yes, that is true, because he ended up with a large group of people who, modern people who study that say that that's where we get gypsies, tramps, and thieves. Yeah, and he had some type of birthmark on him that anybody who saw him, they knew that he was a murderer, and nobody could touch him. Now you got to read that. That's what it says, and God put that there for nobody to bother. You can't bother. So he had, in fact, I'm telling you some stuff that you can read some of it in the Bible, and some of it is not going to be in the Bible. But the fact that he was marked, nobody could kill him, nobody could touch him. You see him, you just run. Just move, get out of his way. And I'm sure that he raised a tribe. That's where all of the unlawfulness came from, his group of people. All right, now, I'm going to leave that alone because I ain't mean to stay there. I just want you to know that Cain had a tribe too. Never said how long he stayed there in the region and spread out. All right, but we do know that by the time we get to Noah, that it's possible that some of his genes are in the three Shem, Ham, Japheth, probably in them somewhere, because they are the ones who carry on society after the flood. All right, so they repopulate the world again. They repopulate the world again to the point where everybody is staying in one region, in one local area. So much so that they start, now you would think that everybody who was the survivors of the ark told the story about what happened and why the rest of the world did not survive. So you would think that everybody born after Shem, Ham, Japheth have heard the story about how that God created the heavens and the earth and all of that, and had given them an opportunity and all of that. They knew the whole Bible story. We don't have a law yet, right? Still don't have a law. They stayed in one space, and the first thing God told Adam and Eve was to do what? What was their main job? Be fruitful and multiply. And pretty much populate this world. This is a whole world. You don't have to stay. It took him a long time for people to not stay in the same place. He had a whole wide world for everybody to go in. Now, here's what happened. They populated one area. They stayed all together. All of them spoke the original language of, at least the original language of Noah. And Noah undoubtedly spoke the original language from Adam, which is the original language that God spoke to Adam in. Am I stretching it too far? So somebody in that group, they still, all of them spoke the same language. So all of them spoke the language of Noah, and Noah spoke the language of Adam, and Adam spoke the language of God because God talked directly to Adam. I hope I'm not taking y'all too fast. They decided, they got away from the purpose of God and said, we're going to build us a building that goes up to where God is. Now, that's a separate story. Sometimes you just hear that part of the story and don't hear all the context. That's the Tower of Babel. That's where we get Babel. And that's why in our vocabulary, the word Babel means that you're babbling and nobody understands you. But that's where the origin was, in that they got to the point where they're going to get everybody organized under one man who they call him now the king of the world. He's the first king named Nimrod. He just happened to be a descendant of Ham. Now, see how much we can get into detail? He's a descendant of Ham, who some people wrongfully believe Ham was cursed by God. Ham was never cursed by God. It was actually his father. It was Noah who put the curse on the grandsons of Ham, but that would have been Nimrod too. But Nimrod is now the king of the world, and because they have a determination to do opposite of what God would want, they don't want to humble themselves before God, but they're going to magnify themselves and elevate a man to a status of God. And his name was Nimrod, king of the world. And what happens is, I can give you some of his qualities and characteristics, but that's not the story. God sees all of this, and what he did to break that up, he confounded the languages. I said everybody spoke the language of God, right? Everybody spoke the language that they learned that was passed down from Adam, so they had to get it from God. So when everybody was confounded languages, that means if you got 1,000 people, I don't know how many languages they broke into, but if you started talking and people looked at you strange, because you look at people strange when they speak a different language, don't you? They look at you strange if you spoke something different. So everybody who hears people babbling, what they end up doing is trying to listen to hear whoever they understand. And everybody who understands me, come on, Talibu, they come over here. Because they say, come on, Talibu at 2. And so we know what we're talking about, and y'all don't. So y'all get as far away from us as you can. And somebody will say, something different over here, sprechen Sie Deutsch. And everybody who understands sprechen Sie Deutsch, they go over that way. And that's why everybody separates themselves from other people, because even today, you kind of stick with people that speak your language. If somebody speaks something different, you kind of get away from them. And that's natural. That was natural. And so that's how, and they went as far away from each other as they could. They didn't realize they were fulfilling what God wanted them to do. Go ahead and populate the earth. But you can't do it all in one place and all of y'all lifting up one man to be a god because he was a mighty hunter. He got his prestige by being a mighty hunter, and he could do great things physically. And so they elevated him to be their leader. So what they were doing was displacing God. They were making him God. If we look at some other literature, we'll find out that they really did deitize Nimrod. Abraham, who lives in the land, actually he lives in the land of Babylon. He is from Ur, which is we only have 3 regions in the world. We got what we call Mesopotamia, we got Egypt, and Canaan. Egypt is Africa. Even though people have tried to separate Egypt from Africa, Egypt is Africa. God told him to leave. Now we're talking about centuries later. Told him to leave his country, and I want you to go to a place where you've never been. And so he gets out from among his people. By this time, there are so many other people who have just abandoned the real God, and they have accepted gods like the descendants of Nimrod, who they became gods in that area. You can go and do research on their gods, their local gods. And so when Abraham is able to travel through Mesopotamia and come out and go to Egypt, he has some encounters with the Egyptians, just like Moses would do 430 years later. Gonna have the same problem with Egypt. But the reason why when they bring them to Canaan, everybody around there is pagan. Now we're going back to your original question. Hold your question. We're going back to our original question. Why did God, kill everybody else? Well, the descendants of Abraham are in a place where it's nothing but pagan. And the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's name changed to Israel, they were given the command to kill everybody around them, because what's going to happen is their people are going to influence your people. I have tried from the beginning to make you a very distinct group of people. And in order to make you distinct, I don't want nobody else to influence it. I want them all destroyed. So God made man the instruments of his justice. Which, he always makes somebody the instrument of his justice, because God is not the evil one. He does things righteous. And so when he does that, the reason why is because all of those people had abandoned God, and they were supposed to be destroyed. Now, Sister Lynn, you had a question. He was living in Mesopotamia, I would say. No, all right. I did not say that. Because depending on who you went with, whoever you went with, you may have gone with people who still spoke the language of Noah, spoke the language of Adam, who actually had the same language of God. Right, there were still people spread around, but everybody scattered, so everybody did not retain God. Some did. And his kindred a relationship with God. There was some of his family who didn't, but he retained God. They tried to every now and then make movies about that, and they had little gods that they would make, and Abraham, as a boy, he would smash him. That's the story that he would smash him. That's put on Abraham, is that he was. But yes, that's a great question, and you have to understand, as I tried to make Jethro, everybody know, all right, Jethro is Moses'. He also had another name. He was a priest of Penuel. He was the priest of Penuel. Because Moses understood in his conversation with him that God and the children of Israel